So now we're going to have a panel session, and our moderator for the panel session is Olaedo Osaka. She is the CEO at Daystar Power Group in Ghana. I will let her introduce her panel and start with answering my own question because obviously I'm important. A round of applause for Olaedo.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome the members of the panel. Ifunanya Nwandu, who is Component Head for Solar Home Systems with the Rural Electrification Agency. Segun Adaju, who was just up here, if he could come back. And Ujunwa Ojemeni, who is the Senior Investment Associate at Olon. So we've heard a lot about the existing infrastructure, about the financing available, and about the technology that's being deployed that makes renewable energy feasible. So it's clear that here in Nigeria, the grid is unreliable. We rely on diesel generators that are polluting and expensive. So there really is some value in solar. Daystar Power Group, for example, we focus on commercial and industrial solar, and there we are able to save companies up to 30%. So the commercials work, right? So it'd just be interesting to hear about, very quickly from each of you, what your role is in building the future of Africa's energy and the constraints that you currently face.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ifunanya Nwandu. I'm the Solar Home Systems Component Lead under the Nigerian Electrification Project. So for those of you that don't know the Nigerian Electrification Project, it is a World Bank-funded project. It's $350 million aimed at catalyzing the off-grid space in Nigeria. It's split across 3 different components, one for mini-grids, which is a $150 million grant program. 2 is the Solar Home Systems component, which I lead, and that's $75 million. And then there's the energizing education, which is about $105, and there's also a technical assistance component. So, yeah, I think that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, and what are 1 or 2 challenges that you face in executing your role?
We just started, we just reached effectiveness, so we're just really trying to kick the program off the ground. And I wouldn't say, I mean, the challenges are not so with us because we have the funding, it's more so with the companies and the type of challenges that the companies face and in actually scaling the market. And I think we can talk a bit more about that.
Yes, exactly, we get to that later on the panel. Segun?
All right, nice to see my colleagues in this sector. For me, I represent the industry players, basically companies, and our role is to go out in the market and deploy these solutions. Of course, there are challenges that we face, but we have agreed that, look, that should not deter us. That should be an excuse for us to stay out of markets. So issues like funding initially was a big challenge to so many companies, but I think it's been cracked now with the support of REA, for example, the mini-grid policy, the funding, the grants has really helped. And the likes of Olon too, grant funding, and also being part of the team that invested in energy. Other constraints basically might be, policy, incentives that we need. For example, solar panel started attracting duties from June last year. And so these are some of those things we're trying to kick against to make life easy for us.
Yeah.
But we know very strongly that despite these constraints, the market is still very big that you can still operate and still is cheaper than generators.
Thank you. And we'll talk a bit more about the policy very, very briefly. But Ujunwa?
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Ujunwa Ojemeni. I'm the Senior Investment Associate at Olon. For those of you that don't know, Olon is an energy impact investing company seeded by Shell. we're focused on providing funding as well as support to off-grid energy companies in Nigeria. Our focus is on companies who are supplying energy directly to either low-income households or SMEs. And the second role we play is catalyzing funding to the sector, so being involved in funds that helps to draw in additional funding into the sector. And then we have a third component, enabling environment, where we support the sector, so research, policy, advocacy, or whatever the sector needs. So in a nutshell, that's what Olon does in the sector.
Thank you very much. So earlier, Daniel mentioned a number that 80 million Nigerians don't have access to power, which is quite crazy. And earlier this week also, the president of the Africa Finance Corporation mentioned, I think 220 out of 330 million Africans don't have access to electricity. So we know that it's a challenge for us here. How would you assess the progress so far of where we're at in terms of the current infrastructure for energy? Segun?
Right. I would say there's been some substantial progress that has been done. I got into this space, I think it was 2011, fresh from banking, looking for what next to do. So I stepped into the energy space. And I can say what we have today is a major improvement from what we had 7, 8 years ago. So today, we're actually seeing solutions being deployed. We're seeing markets, increasing. We're seeing policies being in place. For example, I keep mentioning it. The mini grid policy is still one of the very best things that will happen in this part of Africa that we have in Nigeria. Okay, so substantial progress has been made. But that leapfrogging that we need to get to, that's what I feel the next phase that we need to get to, scaling what we're doing individually and collectively as private companies, and also government, keeping to track, meeting the NDCs, for example, reducing gas emission, and ensuring that there's adequate policy in place that will make our business a lot easier. So good progress, but still so much work to be done.
So talking about the on-grid market, the Nigerian government set some targets, right? So by 2020, it would like to generate 5,335 megawatts, which is not a small number, from renewable energy. And by 2030, 13,800 megawatts. Ujunwa, this one is for you. As a financier of both on-grid and off-grid projects, how feasible and achievable do you think these targets are? And are we on track to achieving those targets?
While we're focused just on the off-grid sector, I can speak a bit based on my experience on off-grid, on-grid supplies. Unfortunately, the market is where it is. There are lots of challenges around the grid, including things around the tariff reviews, which haven't happened, funding to the on-grid sector, given the lingering debts that the sector suffers. There are lots of challenges there. So I would say the targets looks interesting, but it remains to be seen that they can be achieved, given where we are, if something drastic doesn't happen. So I think there needs to be some strong political will to move things forward for the on-grid sector to actually make the progress we hope to make. There were, 14 PPAs that were supposed to have signed a few years ago, but unfortunately, those haven't moved forward. Different issues, including the tariffs, amongst other things. So while it's good, we hope to see more renewables on the grid. It's not making as much progress. For off-grid, I would say that there's been significant progress, as Segun has mentioned. Definitely in terms of the policies, they're in place. We just need to see how they are implemented and executed as we go along. I think there's funding as well. There's a lot of funding as well. So I think companies need to position themselves properly to be able to access that funding. I don't really like to look at it from a megawatt number. I just prefer to see it as one household or one business being lighted up one at a time. I think we sometimes focus too much on the bigger numbers, but I think if we go from bottom up, we will make progress. And as long as we see lights coming on for children to study in the evening, for hospitals to function, one step at a time, I think we'll make the progress we need to make.
Thank you very much. Just while you're still holding up the mic, in terms of your investee companies, are you able to give a sense of the sort of progress and traction they've made as a whole, just to give us some hope? What impact have you seen?
So I've seen some good impact. For instance, one of the companies that we invested in a year or two ago, I think at that point they only had about 25,000 connections. At this time, they are close to 100,000 connections. So it's progress one step at a time. A lot of companies have, big ambitions. Once you have a team in place, once you have the funding in place, I think you're able to make the progress you need to make. If you say, okay, I'll do 3 megawatts a year, 5 megawatts a year, and you keep building that way, gradually, I think we'll make some progress in the off-grid.
Slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely.
Ifunanya, in the same renewable energy plan for solar home systems and rural electrification, there was a target for 25% of the rural population to be served with renewable energy by 2020. I know your unit is part of a larger unit, but what traction are you seeing there? Are we en route towards RE?
I think, as everyone has kind of mentioned today, there is traction, but I don't think it's fast enough because, as we said, 80 million people are unelectrified or do not have access to power in Nigeria, and there's still a huge deficit. And to actually achieve universal electrification, we have to connect 500 to 800,000 households every year. So, in doing that, if you think about it, okay, so we need 8,000 mini grids to achieve 16% of the population, to electrify 16% of the population. Our program will be able to electrify 850 mini grids, and that's for $150 million. So there's still a huge potential. There's still a huge gap in actually achieving the electrification that we actually need. We're making progress, and companies are doing what they can. Capital is coming into the market, but we still need to all kind of work collectively together to move this faster.
Yeah. So we've seen that indeed that capital is coming in. We have some success stories: Daystar Power, Energy, World Bank funding coming up, all on actively supporting in the industry. One would think that this would spur astronomically almost growth in the industry. So Segun, we've seen pricing of solar coming down over time. There's a number mentioned today. It's come down by over 300 times in the last 40 years. What's your take? Are we seeing more traction and uptake from the consumers?
All right, thank you. The global price reduction, I think Nigeria lost 2 steps in that direction. Sometime, if I can use that word. One, when the foreign exchange, changed. Okay, it used to be 158 naira to the dollar. Then, today is about 360. So that's also, so we lost whatever gain we could have seen in the price reduction. Secondly, also, when duties were reintroduced, we also lost some grounds. But despite that, it is still proven that deploying renewable energy technologies like solar is a lot cheaper than generators. So that's why I feel very strongly that it's a win-win situation, even currently, that we need to keep pushing to just displace generators. My company, what we do is also, just like what energy does, maybe at a lower scale, to even small barber shops, for example. Those guys that use the 1 kilowatt solar solution, generators. And that's the most common generator that we have in Nigeria. So out of all the generators, 70% of generators in Nigeria are that tiny. I better pass my neighbor. Very polluting, very noisy. So we say, look, once at a time, if you can take this generator away and just replace, starting with the likes of barber shops, SMEs, small, businesses and co. Then that traction will be shown, okay? And then we try to replicate in such a way that what a customer that is taking on solar in replacement of a generator is paying right now is less than what he's been spending on that generator. So that brings a strong business case. So they pay between 12 to, let's say 24 months to 36 months, and then they end up owning the system. So that is what we're seeing right now. The uptake is really catching on. People are beginning to believe in solar again. But of course, some of the challenges is, funding. So for us to be able to do like 100,000 barber shops in a year, you need huge capital, double what energy has gotten at once, deploy, and then you wait for 24, 36 months to get your money back. So that's the kind of thing we feel that we're seeing. But gradually, people are taking on solar. One thing I like doing is flying to Lagos in the daytime. I'm just trying to, so how many roofs do you have? So interestingly, you begin to see roofs, and if you leave this room this morning or today, be conscious to look at roofs. You'll be shocked at the roofs that we are already having solar panels in Nigeria.
Thank you. So Ujunwa, from an investor perspective, right, now we see that, okay, it's cheaper than the current alternative. It makes sense. Has your investment approach changed? So are you now looking to deploy more capital because now the numbers are finally right? Is that your perspective?
I think it's a double fold. So it's good to see the numbers down. We're focused on clean energy, so it's gas-fired, natural gas-fired, as well as renewables. But for renewables, I think the challenge would remain the business models. So for instance, if you're doing a pay-as-you-go model where, or lease-to-own, where you own the assets as a company, and then you keep on having to raise capital to keep funding additional assets because your customer is not going to pay off for about 3 to 5 years. So it will remain challenging because you need to keep raising funding. So I think it's finding the right balance and business models that work. So maybe if you can have some outright sales, some lease to own, and some even power as a service, for instance, as Daystar does. I think it's a very interesting model, but it's also capital intensive. But I think it will push companies to provide better services, better quality, because you know you own the asset. So you need to ensure that you don't have too many maintenances or too many breakdowns. So I think it's a bit mixed. For investors, impact investors, we like the fact that there's financial return, good financial return. We like the fact that there's also good social impact. So environmentally friendly, better educational health outcomes. But also, we also try to watch out to ensure that those costs don't creep up or those CapEx requirements don't get too high. The last thing I'll mention is around operating costs. So for companies that for some reason have to maintain huge operating costs, maybe you have some foreign affiliation or you have some R&D, research and development plans that takes a lot of funding. You also have to manage that to ensure that it doesn't get too high and your margins start to reduce. So I think when we're looking at it, we try to take a holistic view. Very good that our renewable energy technology costs are falling, but we also look at other costs and ensure that they don't get too high and reduce those margins.
Thank you very much. And Ifunanya, in the residential segment, what sort of models are you seeing there as well? Because I guess one thing that still, yes, we say that the cost has fallen, but still, depending on who your end user is, it's still a relatively high cost upfront, right? So what sort of models are you seeing in the residential segment?
Very similar to what Uju has already mentioned. And I think, with these companies that are actually providing these systems, it's all about the value proposition to the customer, right? It's all about how they sell these systems to the customer. So in the it's actually, there's a huge uptake. I think for the solar home systems that are Lighting Global certified, they've sold about 13,000 systems a month on average in Nigeria. So it's growing and it's huge. And in terms of pricing, the price is coming down as generally, as we all know, the solar panel prices are actually reducing globally, and as such, it's trickling down to the residential customers as well. So the price is also coming down, and also with providing pay-as-you-go options, it's all about cash flow and what the customer is able to pay. And so a lot of companies are providing financing options and whatnot that makes it more attractive and increasing the uptake.
Okay, great. So many times today it's been highlighted that one of the main concerns of developers is access to finance. But we do know that there are people now raising money, right? Daystar Power closed 10 million, Energy closed 9 million. Ujunwa, can you just paint some more context on what the financing landscape is?
In terms of financing, it's clear that there's a lot of interest in the sector. Companies are raising significant amount of funding, as you already said. New investors are looking into the market. So Breakthrough Energy Ventures, that was part of the Energy round, Nor Fund, Electrify, the European Commission supported initiative. They now have, for instance, a dedicated window of 30 million euros for Nigeria. Other investors, such as Acumen, have moved their headquarters to Nigeria from Ghana. Other impact investors like Sun Funder they're looking into the market, and there's so many others. While there's a lot of pledged funding, some of it is waiting to be drawn down. For instance, the World Bank program, as you already mentioned, is another 350 million. The African Development Bank, I believe, has pledged another 200 million. In addition to that, GIZ is running some programs where they provide funding for assets to developers. So I think there's a lot of funding, there's a lot of interest. I think companies need to position themselves to be able to access that funding, put your books together, have a good value proposition, your business models, everything needs to work for you to be able to draw down that funding. But one gap I see that remains is, one, access to local currency financing. Yeah. So what Olon has tried to do is to just start first from a funding platform we have with the Bank of Industry. This is dedicated to the Niger Delta, is 1 billion naira. But this is just a start, and we hope that other people will take a cue from that to provide local currency financing to ease some of the currency challenges that companies typically complain about. But their banks also are beginning to slowly look into the space. Sterling Bank is one of the good examples of banks that are now looking into the space. And I'm hoping that other banks very soon will come around when they understand the sector better. So we need to keep engaging them to just help them build their capacity to understand the sector better and provide funding. But the last one I'll mention is funding platforms. I think they're very important to catalyze funding into the sector. So not trying to go in alone, but trying to get in other people into the room to provide funding. InfraCredit is one of the companies that is doing very interesting work. Just trying to provide guarantees to financiers providing funding, not only to the RE sector, but also infrastructure in general. So I think those kinds of interesting models would help to draw in more funding and give comfort to local investors.
Yeah. So you mentioned about there being funding available, right? But we do see that there's a gap between that funding available and the people that need it the most. But if how do you think we could, or financiers could improve the process to make it simpler for companies that are looking to grow the industry to access the financing that's available?
So one thing I can think of right off the bat is the time it takes to actually access the funding. I know that a lot of companies complain about the long KYC or whatever
due diligence
process to actually access this funding. It's a huge challenge for a lot of companies. I remember I was talking to a company, I think yesterday, they said it took them 1 year for a company to do their due diligence and then for an investor to do their due diligence and then still told them that they were not successful. So they've spent all that time preparing documents, preparing all sorts of things, meeting these investors, and then, nothing happens. So one of the things that we're trying to do with our program is also the turnaround time should be, within a reasonable time that companies can actually access this funding and scale the market quickly. So I think that's one. Two, as Uju already mentioned, is access to obviously local currency. It is a huge barrier here, and a lot of these companies need operating costs in local debt and in local currency, and then the capital costs can be in foreign currency because that's where they buy the inventory and whatnot. So I do think that more initiatives need to be put together to kind of harness all of the discussions around increasing local debt, and it's great to see what Olon is doing to do that.
Yeah. Great. Segun, if I could just ask you also, from your perspective, what more could be done to see more local currency financing options? What more can financial institutions do?
Well, I think it's just to get our banks to come on this sector. As a former banker, I spent about 18 years in the banking industry. It's always very tough to get banks to come on a new market. We saw it happen in the telecoms, but today almost all the banks are playing in there. So once we have the local banks, have the buy-in, they believe in the sector, and it starts from companies like ours providing bankable proposals. And so once the banks, how many banks do we have now? We have half of the banks in Nigeria doing renewable energy funding and financing. Then you see Nigerians walking to their banks, taking a loan to buy solar or biogas or whatever, and then the industry will take its market forces application. What the development partners, what RE and government is doing is also to create an enabling platform where market forces should ordinarily just take off. And then our banks have a big role to play in that area.
Awesome, thanks. We're going to have to jump to questions in about 1 minute, but right before we go there, can we just talk quickly about policy? So I live and work in Ghana, right? And what's quite interesting is how much traction renewable energy has made there. So unlike in Nigeria, where the grid is unreliable, in Ghana, when there's no light from the grid, they have a schedule, and there are apologies on the first page of the newspaper. So the government literally says, sorry, Ghanaians, there was no light. So I guess that's a sort of different environment. But what sort of policies do you think we need to take the country to where we need to be? So what sort of incentives and policies do you think are missing?
I think when it comes to import duty, it's a huge challenge right now in Nigeria. A lot of companies have told me that they've received all types of bills. There's no consistency at the ports. There's a lot of bribery. There's a lot of corruption. There's all types of issues around that. So I think right now the solar panel is at 0%, but every other thing that's attached to it, attracts an import duty and plus VAT of about 25%, which is then forwarded on to the customer and makes the price more expensive for the customer. So for me, what I would think that the government should do is to remove that and have it all at 0%, so that it actually creates an enabling environment for the market.
Segun, what would you say?
Yeah, I totally agree. It's an infant, if I can use that word, infant industry is a new market. The constraints are enormous in terms of the costs, the financing, hindrances. So incentives as this will help. In Ghana, for example, they have the Renewable Energy Act already passed into law.
Yeah.
We only have a policy in Nigeria. Okay, so the second also is that when the common external tariff came, so one of the challenges why solar is attracting duty now is that ECOWAS Assembly have the common external tariff framework that changes the HS code of some of those stuff, right? But what happened in Ghana was that the government of Ghana wrote specifically to customs that please let status quo remain. Don't charge these solar companies any tax until we intervene. So that's the difference. So it takes political will. So if that can happen in Ghana, that should be able to happen in Nigeria. So what we are doing as an association now is that with other renewable energy associations across West Africa, one of the reasons why I went to Dakar, to get the ECOWAS Assembly to review this common external tariff, so that across West Africa, the same policy should obtain. So if Sierra Leone has duty-free, Ghana has duty-free, why should Nigeria not have?
Great. Ujunwa, we're waiting for last question, but we're waiting for the president to nominate ministers, right? What would you expect from the incoming power minister, and perhaps also the new Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment to take the sector to where it needs to be?
So for the sector, I'll just give 2 additional points to what they've already said.
Yeah.
One would be to maintain tax holidays for companies in the sector. So I know pioneer status, you get about 3 years and potentially additional 2 years. If we can maintain that and ensure that the companies, especially those that are even trying to manufacture or assemble locally, get some of those supports, that would be very good. The second thing I would like to see is policy consistency and execution. So although these policies are there are still issues and maybe court cases. Recently, the Ariaria market had some challenges with the Enugu Disco, and those kinds of challenges. I'd like to see government take a clear stand on those issues. One recent consultation paper that the NEC had issued was on distribution franchising, so for the distribution zones. I think that if the government can take a clear step on allowing third parties to work with the distribution companies to ensure reliable supply, I think that would be a great next step to take the country to the next level.
Thank you very much. So now to the questions. So the first one from Francis Sani. Do we have research institutes in Africa who have a core focus on improving output from solar panels? And if the opportunity is so massive, what are we doing to drive deep technological expertise and not just resell? Who wants to take that one?
I can take the second part.
Okay.
So regarding trying to drive technological expertise, I've seen companies now trying to, one of the companies we've invested in, Oxano, they're actually doing some assembly in country in Nigeria. And while maybe they are not actually doing all of the manufacturing of all the parts, I think that's a good first step. And if we can start from there to actually start learning the process and then hopefully implement in the future locally. But I think that's the first step. If we have entrepreneurs like those in the room and others trying to actually establish panel manufacturing or assembly hubs here, I think that would be a first step, but we need to be given the incentives. So if government will support with the right incentives, tax holidays, as I said, the duties, if those duties can be reduced. In terms of research institutes, there are a few, I know the universities, most of the universities now have some form of renewable energy centers. If you can look into that, I think there are a few I can suggest afterwards to the person asking the questions.
Yeah, I could add a few to this. Well, I'm not too sure it's only reselling that we're doing. Let me also start with energy. So energy developed its own system. Even the payment system is developed by energy itself. They call it Internet of Things. So rather than using mobile money, which is not so deep in Nigeria currently. But they might be manufacturing out of China, but they design their own system. So the push now is that in the next 3 to 5 years, energy should be producing these systems in Nigeria, and I'm sure they're working towards that. I also know that Ozano is one. There's a company called Blue Camel in Kaduna doing pretty very well, assembling and doing their own street lights, solar kiosks right here in Nigeria. For research institute, there's a research institute in Ghana. Is it Kwame Nkrumah's?
Yeah, KNUST. Yeah, so the University, Kwame Nkrumah University has a research.
Exactly. I met two gentlemen who are lecturers in the school talking about what they're doing in this space. I also know there's an organization called Naseni in Nigeria. Naseni, I've forgotten the full names now. They are already producing their own solar panels in Nigeria. This is a government agency, but they are already doing solar stuff in terms of solar panels. Although their prices are still be higher than world markets does, so the volume, they're not scaling as much for the price to come down. But as a businessman, really, and let's also throw this open. Most companies are beginning to manufacture out of China. Maybe cost of production or whatever incentive that they have. So your mobile phones, virtually every US company, German companies, they have plants in China. But for us as an association, the push is to get our members to start assembling. We have a few of them already doing it. And then ultimately in 5 years, they should produce. So there's a company doing batteries already in Nigeria now, solar batteries, their panels, their inverters. So in the next 5 years, definitely you see the game to change rather from reselling.
Also, just to add to that, there's also a Ghanaian company that's manufacturing solar panels in Ghana. But again, if you're looking at competitiveness, if the cost of energy there is one of the highest in Africa, then of course they're a bit disadvantaged. But they are companies that are investing in technology. And the next question from Olumayawa Adere Bigbe is, how is the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, I guess this is targeted at you, engaging the Nigerian government on the high duty on renewable products?
All right, so about a year ago, we saw changes in the HS code, harmonized systems code that's used for clearing. So once you have an HS code for an appliance, there's a normal duty that you apply to it. But we found out overnight, customs moved the HS codes around, and then we started paying duties. So since then, we've been engaging. The first thing we did was to have a press conference. Energy was also part of this, to announce to the whole world that this is the challenge we're facing, so draw the attention of everyone to it. It went viral at that time. We had support from NESG, all on, even interestingly, Electrification Agency. Most times we say they are our friends. They are more market-driven, so they supported us, GIZ, Renewable, and we've been pushing ever since. The last bit we had was we were about entering the office of the Minister of Finance. At the end of the day, Customs says, I don't have any power over this. Get approval from Minister of Finance or Ministry of Finance, and then we implement. But of course, elections, change of cabinet. So we're waiting for the new Minister of Finance, and then we continue the bit. But one of that strategy we're using now is to come through ECOWAS Assembly. So we're engaging ECRE, ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, based out of Cape Verde to get ECOWAS Assembly to review the common external tariff. Once that is done, in line with the free trade that is coming up now, the Nigerian government will not have any option than to implement. So both sides pushing the Nigerian government and also pushing ECOWAS Assembly.
Thank you. So from Omimi Okere, Tesla is currently selling solar panels embedded in roof tiling. What would you say the potential is for a partnership with Tesla in Nigeria? Could this technology be adopted otherwise?
So, I can take that.
Yeah.
Tesla is actually already in Nigeria.
Yeah.
For the person that asked the question. And I think they're more focused on the larger scale systems, not actually home systems.
Yeah.
And yeah, it can definitely be adopted in Nigeria, right? Because it's lithium ion. A lot of Nigerian companies are also doing lithium ion batteries as well. So yeah.
I guess also the question is, can you afford? Can you afford it? But they definitely have like a representative, at least in Nigeria, that's pushing their products.
Yeah, sure. A friend of mine, also a former banker, Abiodun
Yeah.
Onu, is their country manager. So it's a strong possibility. But like the moderator mentioned, it's about affordability and cost. For this kind of product, my own opinion is that you must achieve scale before the price will be right. So Tesla will not just bring solution to Nigeria for a few rooftops. They must be able to see like 1 million, I think Daniel mentioned something like that. Oh, there's a potential 1 million household that will take this technology, then let me move into that market. But I think it's very possible in Nigeria to have this technology embedded on our roofs.
Olaposi Falope, what are the regulatory and licensing requirements for off-grid power deployment?
Okay, let me take a shot at this. There's the regulators basically is Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission. For solar rooftops like ours, so I don't need any license to deploy solar power for a barber shop, for example. Okay, as long as it's the right business model, meeting the standard that has been set, is good quality. I don't need to apply to NEC to get a license. But there are thresholds. So, for example, there are mini grids that if they are above a certain kilowatts, you need to meet NEC either for a permit or just to either register it or get a permit or get a license. So there are various policies in place that shows the various thresholds. There are some you just have to get a license. If you are doing I think it's over 1 megawatt now.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, exactly. You need to go to NEC and register. And for your own best interest also, if you're even doing mini grids, even if it's below the threshold for licensing, you are advised to register with NEC, meet the grid code, so that when the grid comes to meet you up there, then it's easy for you to transfer assets at a very good pricing. Otherwise, the discos might just take you out and clamp on your equipment. So getting registered, getting licenses where it's required, and finally I belong to an association so that jointly you can advocate for the industry and then your interests will be covered.
Thank you very much. Anonymous, we have seen and heard a lot on the solar industry, but there's little or no traction on energy management in Nigeria. Shouldn't energy efficiency, energy management, and renewable energy go hand in hand?
It definitely should. I don't know how else to kind of emphasize this, but energy efficiency is definitely a key to, one, reducing the cost of your power.
Yeah.
So having energy efficient appliances can definitely reduce the amount of energy that you actually consume. And what else? Hold on, renewable energy. Yes, it should. Yeah. So I think I've answered that.
Yeah.
Much, yeah.
And Kiona?
No, I just wanted to add that I think the only challenge is that I think sometimes Nigerians feel, let me first see the light in my house before I start worrying about energy efficiency or energy management. But I think it should go hand in hand. It would reduce the amount you spend on energy. And when you start paying, and for people that, for instance, pay to a private company for energy, they know that most times they switch off their lights when they're leaving their houses and they don't waste electricity. So I think we need to start educating ourselves and the general public around managing energy better and using efficient products as well.
And to me also, I totally agree. And I feel that even the system itself in Nigeria needs to encourage energy management generally.
Yeah.
So in the daytime, I'm driving down to my hometown, and you're still seeing some 60 watt bulbs out in the daytime on. Okay? So I feel that the current pricing is still not cost reflective. It's subject to debate. So the Nigerians were paying too cheaply for energy, so we are used to wasting energy. So that culture needs to change first. But if you are a solar energy company like mine, it makes a lot of sense for you to also go the way of energy efficiency. So when we're deploying solar for barber shops, we change all their bulbs. 5 watts max, which are very good, instead of using 48 watts. So we do that first, retrofitting. And then we also add the cost to their cost of solar, and then they have the opportunity of paying over time. So we help them in managing their energy so that the cost of the installation will be lower, and I don't think it's a win-win for everybody.
Great. Just to add 2 points. In Ghana, before you can import any electrical equipment, it has to go through an energy efficiency test, right? That's the starting point. For us as a company, when we go in to do audits and to size systems for clients, we first do an energy audit. And what we've seen is we can save you 30% of your energy costs, but simply by becoming smarter and more efficient in your energy consumers, you can save 20%. So if you then start adding those numbers together, I can't overemphasize what all the speakers have said. They should go hand in hand. Next question from Alpha Beta. What becomes of renewable energy in Nigeria when the government finally gets her electricity business together?
Well, I like these questions a lot, especially this question. Of course, it's good news, or it will be good news if Nigeria finally gets its electricity sector together, right? But let me also share some, case studies rather. Okay, so Germany, for example, you won't say Germany is not getting its electricity, right? Yet they're still doing renewables, wind, solar, heavily. Same in the US. That's where Tesla is from. There's Solar City in the US also, although, I think they've been bought over by Tesla now. All right, so even getting the electricity right, renewable will contribute to that aspect. What we should be saying is, for example, maybe the grid. Okay, so maybe what you mean is that when we government have everywhere, grid everywhere, it's going to be very difficult to have the grid everywhere. It's expensive. It ranges between $7,000 to $10,000 per kilometer to lay the grid. Do we have the money right now in Nigeria? Are there other pressing needs that we have? So these are the issues that, so even if the grid is everywhere, renewables will still be very, very relevant because it's going to be cheaper. It's an opportunity for you to reduce emission and reduce the potential climate, issues that we're going to have. So as long as you have signed the NDC, Nationally Determined Commitment, and the Paris Accord, then you still have to do renewables.
I'll just add that, for any country or any region, when you're determining your energy mix for the future, renewables is increasingly becoming a major part of it. There are projections for Nigeria, for instance. I think the target is about 30% of renewables by 2030. So I think any organization or even any country that is looking towards the future must consider renewable energy as part of the mix if you want to be sustainable. Most big oil companies now have a huge renewables portfolio. So I think looking towards the future, renewables are here to stay, and I think we should just get with the reality that we have on ground now.
I hope you have heard about Daystar Power. But Anonymous says, this is the first time I'm hearing energy. How are you going about creating awareness on your brand? And is there a revenue model that individuals can benefit from as relating to driving communities to energy?
Anonymous. Interesting. Yeah, so we've grown the company as a very, very frugal company. So we've not really spent money on advertisement. So maybe that's why Anonymous has not heard of energy. Is there a revenue model that allows for revenue sharing or to help create opportunities? Yes. So if you go on our website, you can apply as a solar angel. And what that means is we are opening up opportunity for everyone to be an evangelist. And when you do that, you can be sure that we will reward you in a very good way.
In heaven or on earth?
Say that
In
again.
heaven or on earth?
Yeah, exactly. So we know you are solar angel. We won't wait till you get to heaven before you get a reward. You will get a reward here too. Thank you.
Thank you. So from Tommy Shift, mini grids are currently set to a 1 megawatt generation cap in Nigeria. Around the world, it is set to 10 megawatts. Is that affecting progress with solving the power situation?
What mini grid? A cap of 1 megawatt? Maybe I need to check my policy again. Yeah. Right. I'm not too sure there's any cap to what the size can be. Right? There is?
Yes, there
okay.
is. So I think, yes, 1 megawatt, given the regulation, and when you go beyond 1 megawatt, you start applying for other licenses, maybe as a captive power plant, embedded power, or whatever other plants or type of generation. But I don't necessarily think it's affecting our ability to solve the energy problem in Nigeria. Most companies now and products are very scalable. So, you can just stack it up. So if you have a 1 megawatt and another 1 megawatt beside it, there are very many ways of skinning the cat. It doesn't have to be that you do 1 megawatt and then maybe go somewhere else to do another 1 megawatt. It's really just around getting the license that is the question. It's not really about how much you can actually deploy. So I think it's a bit of a gray area, but it's not necessarily that you can't do more than 1 megawatt. It's really about how the licensing works. But I think, increasing it from 1 megawatt, I don't think is a big issue, but there are other ways, there are other licenses you can get if you want to.
Right, so it's basically licensing rather than a cap.
Taslim Salaudin, hi. If you were to have a data bank for faster deployment of energy solutions, what would you expect from such a data set? What would you love to know about any area before you qualify it as an area for development? If this data analysis is made available, what would be the impact?
So funny, the REA has a huge data collection initiative to really help, particularly the mini-grid market, because they've realized that a lot of the companies in Nigeria don't have access to viable data, and they spend a lot of money, actually going to these areas and collecting data and trying to estimate or identify the commercial viability of that area. So one of the things that the REA does is they've identified a few sites that are in Nigeria that are commercially viable, looking at the financial, the legal, the community, and looking at how whether or not they can pay and whatnot. So there's all types of data that's being collected through the REA. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. I'll just add 2 things that it would be interesting to see in those databases, which they already collect, would be the population density in those areas to see how big is the size, population size, and maybe that will determine what kind of solution will be most suitable for that area. Is it a mini grid or a solar home system? I think the other thing will be the amount of disposable income in those communities. What kind of economic activities are they doing? Is it farming, is it fishing, or is it just mostly just residential? And that's some information they're already gathering on that database. So those are the kinds of information that is typically useful when you're trying to determine energy solutions in different communities.
So with the data that we've collected, it's still ongoing. There's lots of data. And there's different companies that are actually analyzing that data, like Frame, for instance. I don't know if you've heard of Frame, where they layer different types of information, around Nigeria, different statistical information to pinpoint specific needs or specific indicators, as you've mentioned. So there is that available, and it will become more available as we finalize that initiative. Yeah.
Thank you all very much for your time, and thank you to the audience for all the questions.
Oh, they're done. Thank you guys very much. Thank you.